One thing before we get started, Gretchen, I just wanted to let you know is that, and Anabel as well. So Anabel's having some trouble with her computer being able to see the slides, and I just want to make sure that you can see. I just have like a little intro here, and then for some of the pieces that you wanted to show here, I'm going to upload them right now. And then also if there's any of the pieces that you want to play, you can actually go at the top there, there's a little icon that says share, and you can actually screen share while you're doing your presentation as well. So just to let you know, that's an option, and I'm going to upload the rest of the PowerPoints now, or the one PowerPoint here that I have.
Tell me, sorry, where the share option is? I don't see it. I see.
Okay, let me just. I'm going to make sure that you're on here as a. Okay, so just making sure that you. Do you see it now? Yeah, I just realized you weren't. Okay, so yeah, the share icon, and then to the far left is share things directly from your computer screen. You'll see that. So yeah.
My computer.
Yeah, you can share from yours as well.
And so you said you're uploading things, so I don't need to share things. But if something comes up and I can.
Yeah, exactly. If you wanted to show something, or if you wanted to show a video, or any of that stuff, we can either put it in the chat box so people can take a look at it while we're continuing the presentation, or you can screen share. I'm just letting you know you have that option. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, so just give me a second, folks. We'll get started in just a minute. Okay, folks, I think we'll just get started here. We've got a couple more people who've joined on, and we'll, as we move forward, I'm sure a few more folks will join us. So good afternoon where I am, maybe good morning where some of you are. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our webinar. If you're on the training by phone, I just want to remind you, you can also see the presentation visuals by going to anymeeting.com/radioprometheus1, that's the number 1 at the end, and signing into the meeting. And this will also allow you to use the chat box, which is how we will be fielding questions for the Q&A following the presentation. And I can see some familiar, I guess I can't say familiar faces, but familiar names. And so I know that many of you are familiar with the chat box, but keep that in mind. That's how we're going to be that's how I'll be finding the questions for our presenters this afternoon. My name is Leah, and I'm the Education and Training Coordinator here at the Prometheus Radio Project. And we're here for the training Locally Sourced News, How to Build a Volunteer News Department. Just thanks again, everyone, for joining us for this training. I just wanted to let folks know this is part of a series of webinars that are leading up to the FCC Low Power FM application window this October, in fact, in a couple of weeks. So long as the current government situation doesn't shut down the FCC as well, but we'll leave that out for this training and talk about that later. I just want to let you know there's a few more upcoming webinars leading up to the window. There's the Spanish language application walkthrough, which you can see is up there Wednesday, unfortunately spelled incorrectly. I'm sorry, everyone. Just noticed that now. That's going to be October 2nd, which is tomorrow. That's in the afternoon. Yeah, you can sign up by going to our website, prometheusradio.org/webinars. That one's also in the afternoon at 1. That's with Ana Martina, our technical director, and Scott Pinkelman, who is working with the applicant support team. And they're going to do the entire walkthrough of the application, Form 318, all that stuff in Spanish. So that will be excellent. Following that, next Tuesday, also in the afternoon at 1 p.m., is the Grassroots Fundraising Workshop. That's going to be with Lorene Francois from who's the training director, at the Grassroots Institute for Fundraising Training. She's really great, and I'm really excited to have someone from GIFT, which is the acronym for Grassroots Institute for Fundraising Training, with us to talk about strategies for fundraising. And then just to let you know, this is a webinar that is not being put on by Prometheus, but is being put on by the FCC itself. And that's going to be, this actually is incorrect. I just noticed they just changed it. And so it's going to be on Thursday, October 3rd from 1 to 2:30 p.m. So it's the same time, but they actually moved it a day. So just so you know about that when these slides were done. That it was scheduled for Wednesday, but we just got word that it got moved. So just keep that in mind. And of course, any of the webinars that we put on here at Prometheus are then archived at prometheusradio.org/archives. You can find ones that were part of this series that have just been happening in the last couple months, as well as ones that we've done in the past, and you're welcome to check any of those out. So just a little bit about Prometheus. I know some of you, as I was saying, I can see that you've joined us before, but I'd like to just let everyone know a little bit about where we are coming from here. Prometheus is a not-for-profit based in Philadelphia, and we've been around for 15 years doing work to build participatory radio as a voice for community expression and a tool for social justice organizing. We exist to counter the corporate consolidation and control of the media. Over time, media has become less and less accessible to communities as corporations have acquired a bigger share of the media landscape. It's not in the interest of this small handful of corporations to effectively represent, celebrate, and affirm the varied communities that we are all a part of. We need our own media outlets to tell our versions of history, to make our own news that combats stereotypes and speaks truth to power, and to create positive changes in our communities. For the last 13 years, Prometheus has helped hundreds of communities start their own radio stations, and today over 800 low-power FM stations are on the air. This fall, in fact in a couple weeks, many new channels are becoming available all across the nation, and this is an opportunity for communities to own their own media infrastructure through starting low-power community radio stations. By community radio, here at Prometheus, we mean transformative for both listeners and media makers, participatory as in democratically organized with community involvement in the production of content, and affordable and accessible stations with multimedia capabilities that are locally rooted. We here at Prometheus are on the ground in communities across the country, working with the grassroots groups like the ones many of you joining us today are a part of. We want to use the media to create a more democratic society, and these training webinars are part of our strategy to promote participatory radio as a part of building that society. please consider supporting Prometheus, where your financial support today means a better media future. You can visit our website to support our work. It's prometheusradio.org/donate. So just to go over our goals, we have I kind of squished all our goals into one statement here: to review ideas, to do the outreach, coordination, and training to have a functional and well-equipped volunteer news department. And to talk to us about that today are Gretchen King and Anabel Khoo, who both have long histories being involved in community media, specifically community radio. They're both experienced radio journalists and have both been involved in the planning, development, and success of volunteer news departments at both CKUT in Montreal and CHRY in Toronto, and maybe other stations that I don't know about in your history. So you folks can chime in on that. Give us some more background on your history and experience working with both community radio and specifically with news departments. And so without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to you folks. And I'm just going to bring up your outline so that folks can follow along with that, and then I'm going to be adding things in as we go along, and I hope that works for the two of you.
Cool, that's great, Leah. Thank you.
Great, no problem.
Thanks. So, Anabel, I'll give a quick intro for myself first.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay, so thank you folks for joining us for this webinar. It's my first time engaging this software, so that's kind of fun. And also doing this kind of online instruction beyond one-on-one through Skype. So this will be interesting to try to have a group conversation through chat and this medium. My own experience with volunteer news production dates back to 1999 in coordinating the audio team for the Independent Media Center, which was set up to welcome the World Trade Organization to Seattle in the end of 1999, as I mentioned. So since then, I worked a lot with indie media, setting up various convergences on the East Coast. I've attended the Grassroots Radio Conference in the States, again, doing volunteer news trainings there. And as Leah mentioned, worked here in Montreal to develop a non-hierarchical volunteer production powerhouse at CKUT, where we have a daily news program that airs Monday through Friday to 5 to 6 p.m. And we've won some awards in our time. So I think it's really great that we can use people power to do this kind of really excellent social justice rooted programming. So I'm excited to talk about that today.
Great. Thanks, Gretchen. So hey, folks, my name is Anabel, and yeah, it's also my first time using this phone web meeting software, so that's interesting. Looking forward to your questions. Yeah, I guess I have mostly done a lot of training-based stuff with community radio. I worked at CKUT with Gretchen, and I also helped set up a collective news program called News Now at CHRY 105.5 FM in Toronto, as well as I've done a little bit of stuff. I used to be an intern at Prometheus Radio Project, so I'm familiar with a little bit of the stuff around getting ready for the licensing window. And so, yeah, any questions, just give us a shout, and I guess we can get started.
So we're going to start with some examples. Go ahead. I was going to say that we're going to start with
outreach.
Yeah, exactly. Some examples of outreach, and we wanted to talk about strategies, specific strategies that we saw as successful in our stations and our various news projects throughout the year. So from the CKUT experience, I saw some pretty different types of community-based news initiatives that were successful. You know, everything from doing outreach, going to youth centers, talking about what community radio is as a method for bringing those youth into the station as potential programmers. So basic info sessions in the community in various types of centers, going to places, making sure that people know that there's a community radio station is a great way to recruit volunteers, especially volunteers engaged in specific issues. So going to an environmental center to get people who might be interested in covering the environmental beat, for example, or youth for covering the youth beat, for example. We also had a successful initiative here at CKUT where we went to a youth center which was a Native Youth Center here in Montreal, and set up a broadcast booth in the youth center. So through a grant from the City of Montreal to support intercultural relations among different communities, we were able to buy equipment to install in this broadcast booth, and then facilitated trainings there and a radio show on a weekly basis covering Native issues. And so that was a really great way to find a space in the community to actually be producing content from. And one of the challenges we were trying to sort of deal with in that solution was not all communities find our station very accessible. So I don't know where you hope your stations will be or where they are, but CKUT is located at the top of a hill next to a university. And so it's not right next to a public transit line or necessarily accessible for someone who doesn't want to walk up the hill. So going out into the community and doing broadcasting is a really great way of creating news content and finding volunteers for programming. Other things that we did, whenever you give a volunteer the basic skills of recording, a great way for them to get involved right away in producing news content is send them out to community events. So whether it's a book launch, a lecture, or a panel happening in the community, a volunteer who's had a couple times working with the portable recorder can go to those events and capture some really good sound, and that provides a great service to the community for listeners who are not able to get out to those events, or even maybe want to have an archive of that event. And so in some ways, the station can be the collective memory of the community by documenting all the various community events and presentations, people coming through town, people from the community launching books, what have you, and that collective memory is a value in the community. The last thing I want to mention is that we had a lot of citizen forums on topical issues, and so this could be various things, either broadcasting from the community. I have the Homelessness Marathon as an example later on in the program, so we'll talk about that specifically later, or doing call-in programming around specific issues. So, for example, here in Montreal, we have something called Moving Day. It's actually a day where the majority of leases, tenant leases, come up for renewal, and so a lot of people are facing issues about signing leases. They have specific questions about their rights, and it's not easily accessible, the information, and so having a talk show around these issues gives an opportunity for listeners to call in around their housing concerns and have answers immediately. And so we've done those sorts of things in the past. Beyond housing, we've talked about police brutality. We've talked about other topical issues in the community. So those are some examples in terms of strategies around different types of news content.
Also at CHRY we did similar things. I think that a lot of the things we did were similar to what Gretchen mentioned around special topics. But I think the most important thing for us has been we're also not very accessible for a lot of people because we're located on a university campus, and even though we're right next to a variety of neighborhoods, it's actually really hard for folks to just walk into the station. So we've tried to collaborate on a lot of annual events at community centers. We do an annual broadcast every year from the Driftwood Community Center just in the neighborhood next to us. That's traditionally a working-class people of color neighborhood, and we purposely, contact folks that we know we already want to work with who are under-resourced. So it's sort of, you kind of have to make those decisions if you are a new station or you have limited resources. It's important to really think about who you want to prioritize, because ideally it would be great to have everyone come in, but there's a lot of folks who really could use the station resources more than others. So just investing in, like Gretchen said, some recording equipment and going out there and having events that are half informational but also half skill-based building. So you can, people can learn about your radio station and what you have to offer, but at the same time learn about how to record or interview and do something new, and that really helps people feel like they're able to plug in more easily. We also do some other special programming that helps collaborate with groups that already exist in the community. So a lot of the time, there's things that are already happening that you can just plug into as a radio station. But it's just a matter of letting people know that you're there and you can offer the kinds of resources. So we do some special programming with folks around, for example, in February we do a thing called African Liberation Month, and we work with a lot of groups just talking about histories of African liberation as well as contemporary activist work. And that's sort of our alternative way of talking about Black History Month for a more like activist-based approach. And we also sometimes do things around stuff that comes up. So we had a info marathon on the Haiti disaster a few years back, and that helps really galvanize a lot of folks to talk about whatever they were going to do in the Haitian community in Toronto. So yeah, there's a lot of good examples. You can find more information on our websites, but it's just good to think about what's already out there in the community and see how you can collaborate with folks on that.
Yeah, I think one thing to note is that I see it at CKUT in our music department and our culture department as well. We find those annual institutional events that really reflect the Montreal community, and rather than just inventing programming out of nothing, we piggyback on these events and make programming at these events. And so here in Montreal, we have a gigantic book fair every year. It's the Anarchist Book Fair. It's been going on for more than 10 years. And for many, many years, CKUT has annually broadcast from that event. And so much so that it's now part of that institution. And so that's a really great way for your station to really directly relate to your community by aligning itself with events that are already happening on an annual basis. Are there any questions at this point? Because we're going to move on to talk more about kind of structures we can create in our station. We talked a little bit in the chat box about how do you make archives of community events available, and so if you want to see some suggestions there, I typed a few things. So the next topic then is News Collective mandate and structure. I put two resources in a document that Leah, I believe, has made available. One is a book on community news journalism, and the second is an article that Anabel and I and a few other members of the Groundwire Steering Committee wrote about community news journalism in Canada. And I think it's really important that if you're going to create a news department, to just have some context and some history about what makes community news journalism different from other types of journalism. And I think the Ford book is a really good example of the history. It's nice to know. For example, community journalism is older than modern professional journalism. We have a history that goes back much further. So I think that's, just a sample of the kind of information that you'll get from this book. She surveys different international examples of forms of community journalism. And then the example from Canada talks again specifically about Groundwire, how the form and the content is different than public broadcasting. And I think that's where the challenge comes for community radio in North America, is that we're often broadcasting alongside of other public service broadcasters like National Public Radio, or here in Canada we have the CBC, and our form and our mandate is different than the public sector, and so I think this article does a good job of explaining what that difference is, but also the challenges. It talks about some of the regulatory challenges that we face here in Canada. So we also wanted to point out the Groundwire editorial policy for you, which is available online. I think that it can be shown on the slide here. So I'm just going to let Leah handle that part, but I'll go through what I have in front of me, which I'm hoping you guys see too. So the Groundwire editorial policy, first of all, a few words about Groundwire. Groundwire is basically Canada's national campus community radio news program. It's a 29-minute biweekly program. It features headlines, reports, and short documentaries from community radio journalists across the country. It's a biweekly program, so it airs every other week, but it's hosted by a different station every other week as well. And so we have about 6 or 7 producing stations now. and it's basically a very similar format to what Free Speech Radio News used to be, but it doesn't have the budget that Free Speech Radio News had up until last Friday. So it's actually an all-volunteer project. And over the years, we've developed it. We've had, a small grant that we were able to do some development work with it, some national coordination work. And part of that was getting our policies in line. And so here we have the priority bureaus listed of Groundwire. So these are the topics that this news program will prioritize for any pitch that comes in. And you can see that it covers different movements, different social justice issues that are pertinent in Canada today. And this was put together by our steering committee. Just underneath that, you can see the editorial policy attempts to define, from our perspective, community news journalism's approach to things like balance, diversity, context, participation, how we source our program. So the difference when you look at an example of community news journalism versus something that's available on private or public media, you'll see the difference in the definitions here. So, for example, Groundwire sources, we have, for Groundwire, worked with communities in producing pieces about their communities. And so where in traditional sort of mainstream journalism practices, you have to have someone who's disconnected from that community, reporting on that community so that they can maintain their, put their bias in check by not being directly implicated. And I think that community news journalism definitely stretches those traditional boundaries by having more of a participatory approach and having sources be those from the community, but also producers can be from the community as well. And so, for example, we have programming that'll air on Groundwire from about prisons produced by prison abolitionists or prison activists. So that's sort of an interesting difference between our approach and the approach of public and private media. So I would invite you to have a look at the Groundwire editorial policy. Editorial policies are important for orienting news volunteers to sort of the mandate of the news show and what kind of content you're looking for. A lot of our news producers have never produced news programming before, so this is really an opportunity to educate programmers about the kind of journalism that you're looking for, but also how that journalism is different to what is aired on the other stations. Anabel, did you have anything else you wanted to add at this point? Okay, I can go on to the PowerPoint presentation unless there's any questions about the editorial policy at this point. Okay, so for the PowerPoint, I think that when we talk about the media with volunteers who are coming into our stations, one of the tools that I saw a need for here at CKUT was a basic overview of what oppression is in the media. The reason why that was so important is because we talk at CKUT, and it's actually in our programming mandate to be the voice of the voiceless, to be the voice of those communities who are either misrepresented or underrepresented or just plain falsely represented in the mainstream media. We seek to strike a balance to that and be an alternative and to be different and to provide spaces for those communities to engage in self-representation, to come in and represent their own issues. We have a Black community news show that airs on CKUT that came together right after there was a huge media interest in the Black community, and they didn't like the way they were represented around a certain issue, and so they thought we really need to get our own news shows so we can represent ourselves. And I think that's a really good example of a community taking access to a news program, getting access to a news program so that they can more accurately represent themselves. And so this particular PowerPoint is an interesting tool because it approaches oppression in the media by defining what oppression is and then looking at a specific example of how oppression occurs in the media. There's two examples here, one related to Aboriginal representation and one related to representations of mental health. So I think that this is a useful teaching tool. I'll go through it very quickly for the purposes of today. The first slide just tries to define different stereotypes or different types of oppression that occur in the media, whether it's stereotypes, false information, misrepresentations. The next couple slides try to talk about the intersectionality of oppression and different types of that, different instances of that in the media. And then the next slide, sorry, I'm sort of confused about which slide we're on now. The next slide gives the examples of the Aboriginal portrayal in the ad of Esca Water, which I don't know if it's sold down south or if this ad campaign aired south of the Canadian border, but these are white actors dressed as supposed Aboriginals, and it's this invented narrative that many in the Aboriginal community found very offensive of these warriors fighting to keep their water pure. And so there was actually a campaign in the Aboriginal community to have this ad campaign overturned, and it was. So there was that example. And then if you go to the next slide where it says mental health in the media, there was a report that was conducted and prepared by the Canadian Mental Health Association in 2004 talking about mass media and mental illness. And the reason why they took up these issues is because mass media are pretty much the source for public information and information for politicians about mental illness. And so how the mass media represents mental health and mental illness directly impacts how people living with mental health or mental illness, what kind of resources they have access to, what kind of experiences they have getting access to services because of oppression that they might experience due to information being broadcast in the mainstream media. So I think that this report is really useful for showing that oppression in the media has real tangible impacts. It impacts public opinion, it impacts political opinion, and it impacts lives. And this report also documents very thoroughly instances in advertising, in film, in broadcast media of oppression of mental illness or misinformation, stereotypes, negative images about mental illness in the media. And so the last slide just talks about how we can fight media oppression. And so obviously talking about oppression in the media and recognizing the media's role in oppressing communities and prohibiting oppressive content on our own airwaves. So CKUT has statements about no homophobic information, no sexist information, etc. No content like that's allowed. And so those issues are not just affecting our news content, but it also affects our cultural and our music content as well. Acknowledging that there's systems of power and domination in how media are organized. And here at CKUT, we've not only just tried to acknowledge that there's hierarchical systems of domination within the media system, but we've also tried to reorganize ourselves to sort of create new ways of organizing media production that are less dominant and less hierarchical. So, of course, offering programming that breaks stereotypes, that empowers marginalized communities by prioritizing self-expression, those are really, really important. And again, the Homelessness Marathon is an example of that. Are there any questions about this teaching tool or this information so far? It was made for a group of adults living with mental illness, and so it's really supposed to be kind of a 101 approach to talking about media and oppression. And I think it's a good tool for volunteers coming into stations that might not necessarily have this background. So you might consider something similar. Anabel, did you have anything to add at this point?
I don't think so. I guess I can explain, should I explain the example of the collective guide that we have at CHRY?
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Okay. Yeah, so I forgot I was on mute before, so there was a big silence, and I was just like, it's fine, keep going. Yeah, so for us, we also have a similar editorial policy for our news show. Again, it's called News Now. And we made a toolkit so that folks could have a copy of it, and we revisit it as a collective often so that people feel like they're part of the process in building this mission, vision, and mandate for the show. And it's really important to hash this out as early as possible, because it goes a long way in keeping the collective organized and making sure that the content of the show meets the goals and the vision of the station. So once you have it written out, it also, it's motivating, but it also gives you a really good way to evaluate whether you're meeting the vision and goals of the community. So our toolkit includes stuff like you can go to the link, hopefully, and if not, we'll send you the link to look at the document. And we have, for example, our vision that just explains, what your station or what your program is striving towards, kind of like your dream world and how radio fits into that. Your mission would be sort of the day-to-day, what you're going to be, sorry, I'm just looking at ours, what you're going to be doing. So for us, ours is as an alternative news outlet. News Now works as a team to collectively share skills and tasks among ourselves. We are also committed to challenging ourselves and analyzing our stories individually and at our weekly story meetings. So we have weekly story meetings where we get to discuss what we're working on, and also, if need be, tackle some of these more long-term issues like the mission and mandate. We also approach our stories using a framework we call 3D content. And so it's called 3D because there's 3 Ds, and it's sort of a catchy way of just reminding us what our goals are. So the first one is dig deep, uncovering the greater issues and meaning behind the story. The second one is what we call define solutions, which means focusing on action-based solutions in the community. And the third one is design with sound, so reminding us to creatively engage listeners with the magic of audio. Just to remind people we're making radio. And finally, we have our mandate that just explains that, basically we're a community-based station, and we're here to foster a strong community-led movement for more critical and representative media. We also have very practical things that are helpful for our volunteers, such as the breakdown of the hour. So we have a weekday program that's from 5 to 6 p.m., and we try to cover specific topics like, because we're on a campus, we have a campus report, we have one feature interview, community listings, as well as an independent arts and culture report. You don't have to have it as structured as we do, but this is just an example of a way that you can break down that hour so that people can expect these specific reports. And then, as we mentioned, in terms of outreach, you can outreach based on those topics or those segments. And some other things we have the an example script, so folks can, in our collective, script their own shows, so it doesn't always have to be the same person. We also have a list of roles and tasks so that people know, what is entailed in each program. And we try to have people rotate tasks so everyone learns different skills and people can support each other, and a lot of the time volunteers teach each other. So it isn't just the staff or the main people at the radio station doing that for folks. People are really just sharing from their own experience amongst each other, and we find that really builds the idea of collective work. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for the example. We'll make sure to get that link for you so you can look at the whole thing in detail.
Anabel, I'm going to suggest that we jump to training because Barry was asking about training, and I think it also relates to the point that we're on now, especially because you brought up the guide. Is that okay? Okay. So in terms of training, we're going to just review some of the tools that we use at our stations for training, but I have to say that our approach is pretty much like the mandate of community radio. A lot of the training happens in a very participatory fashion. So yes, we do develop resources to provide context. So for example, there's the Campus Community Radio History, Structure, and Sound guide that I had prepared for a CKET presentation. which is part of CKUT's volunteer training weekend. So CKUT has 3 days in which it sets aside time for volunteers to get training. And these 3-day trainings happen every couple of months, and sometimes every month, depending on the desire among the volunteers. So about 40 volunteers join for a session on a Friday evening where there's food and sort of just discussion, questions, listening. It's a very informal gathering in which people not only get to hear about the history of campus community radio, but they get to look at that history in the context of CKUT's actual mandate and statement of principles. And so they think about the difference between community radio and a rural community and an urban community, community radio and its history and its associative history, right? Because in Canada we have the National Campus Community Radio Association, so that has a specific history. We're also part of the World Community Radio Association, which is a movement of community radio broadcasters worldwide. So right from the start, listeners or volunteers coming into the station are recognizing that they're part of a bigger movement of community radio. It's not just this one isolated incident here at CKUT. We also take a listen to examples of community radio programming. We also go through the news data analysis, which is part of the outline that we sent to Leah, so it's part of the documents that you'll have access to as well. This news data analysis is really useful for showing the difference in approach between community programming and public broadcasting approaches to journalism. So much of what we've talked about is sort of demonstrated in this news data analysis. So in addition to that, it'll be the kind of environment where people can obviously ask questions, bring up their own examples. After going through kind of the history and structure and sound of campus community radio in Canada, we go through the specific policies that CKUT maintains in something we call the Blue Book. So it's about 40 pages of our bylaws and all our policies that affect volunteers at the station, put into one single document and made available in an online PDF to the volunteers coming for the volunteer training weekend. So some of them print it out and come with it. Some of them just have it on their devices. But we go through it and, again, ask questions, explain different policies, and that's day one. The next day, people come either in the afternoon or in the evening for a 4-hour session offering different trainings. So the trainings will feature portable recording training, training in our production studios, interview skills workshops, and how to produce news programming. Those kinds of trainings happen, like I said, over a 4-hour window on Saturday and Sunday, and the volunteers sign up to either come in the afternoon or in the morning. So that's how CKUT approaches volunteer training for all new volunteers at the station, but volunteers coming into the news department after they've received this training, or if the training weekend's not right away, if it's like going to be a month away, they can get involved right away and off the hour, sitting in on shows, helping to write the run sheet, basically ghosting, sitting alongside of other producers who already have the skills and the experience, working alongside of them to get those skills and experience. So it's a lot of learning while doing, and that's a very concrete way for people to get involved but also gain skills while they're involved. We'll send people out 2 by 2 to demonstrations or events in the community. Somebody wants to go and record presentations happening at a book launch. Well, a new volunteer will go with them to see how they do that. How do they set up the microphone? Do they use a mic stand on the table? What kind of audio do they get? What do they do with the audio after? So to go alongside of people throughout the process so that they can see a very clear example of how to get involved. So that's a few approaches to volunteer training. I think that my favorite technique is putting volunteers in the hot seat. So giving them a few trainings at the board, in the on-air studio, having them feel comfortable, and then running away, standing just outside of the studio door in case there's an emergency, but giving them that confidence that they can do it by themselves and press the buttons and not mess up. And even if there's a second of dead air, that's fine. Just letting people know that they can do and putting them in the hot seat and letting them make mistakes, but know that mistakes are acceptable as well. Anabel, did you have anything to add to that?
Sure, yeah, I could say just a little bit about the way that we do our trainings. It's a lot of the same skills, policies, and exercises that Gretchen mentioned. The way that we do it is instead of over a weekend, it's staggered. So we have it's a series of 3 trainings, and we have them each twice a week. So on one week, it's 2 training number 1s. The next week it's 2 training number 2s. And the following week is 2 training number 3s. So there are different times. One is in a week. There's one in the daytime, and then there's another one in the evening for folks who can't make it during the day. And our trainings are, there it is. It's in the slide. The first training is scripting and voicing. So we talk about the do's and don'ts of scripting as well as voicing. We practice using our studios as well as our portable recording equipment. And we look at some do's and don'ts. So if you have stories that you feel like are really good examples and some that aren't, you can listen to them together. And I think listening together really helps train the ear for what you're looking for in the radio, for your radio programming. The second one is on audio editing with Audacity. So it's working with a really basic audio editing software and just going through the tools and having people work on a file together. So either we have a song that needs to be edited for swears, or we have a story that we work with a sound file where it was someone reading a story and we scrambled it up, and then folks have to rearrange it in order, and in the process they learn how to use the basic tools of editing together. And then the last one is training number 3, and that's called The Power of the Interview. And this is a really great training that I researched from the Global Action Project. They're a youth media group based out of New York City, and they have free curriculum online on their website. But the version that we have is in the document that I have here. And that's basically about, it kind of combines the goals and the ethics of community journalism with the interview. So when it comes to actually applying those principles, how do you shape your interview questions? What are some things to think about before and after the interview? And how do you go about thinking about the interview process through a power analysis? So, there's a lot of power when you're holding the mic, sometimes you end up, you have the power to control the conversation. So we have those kinds of more philosophical discussions with our volunteers for the last training. And so once people complete all 3, then they're able to contribute to the news programming, and they can come basically to those weekly news meetings that we have to plug in to either help someone or take on a story and do their own thing that's new.
I wanted to add something there, Anabel.
Mm-hmm.
So the structure of our news department is similar to CHRY's in that we also have a weekly news meeting, and I think that that's a really important structure to highlight between our 2 approaches because it allows volunteers to get regularly updated information about how they can get involved regardless if they're fully trained or not. A volunteer can participate in a news meeting, get information, shadow an assignment, and so on. So I think it's really important that if you want to have news content, to have a regular space for volunteers to come and get plugged into news opportunities. The way I facilitated these news meetings whenever I was news coordinator here at CQUT is I would print off every event, announcement, press releases, reports off of independent media sites locally, and put that all in a packet to pass around. And if a volunteer was interested, they could take it out of the packet and sign their name on it. I would send the information directly to their email, but then I would have a copy of which assignment they had taken. There's also a big calendar in the newsroom. I think they've moved to Google Calendar now, but they had been using a whiteboard in the newsroom just to plan out the programming for the week. And so every week in this news meeting, we look at the week ahead or the month ahead of us, and we plan special programming, we plan weekly programming, and we pass out the news packets so that people can collaborate. And this is a really great sort of non-hierarchical exchange, not me, the news director, saying, hey, you're going to cover this, but people saying, hey, I'd like to cover that. Another volunteer saying, hey, I'd like to offer, you know, my help, or I saw this article that you might be interested in reading. Just a real collaborative, horizontal space for developing weekly content. I think something else to mention about the different approaches to training, there's some pros and cons to both, right? Like we have the volunteer training weekend. That might not be accessible to all, and you still might have to follow up with individual trainings. CKUT used to have a program more like CHRY has, where we'd have staggered trainings and then volunteers would have to sign up. That would often bottleneck, and we'd have many volunteers waiting for training because a lot of those sign-up trainings were one-on-one trainings, and so it took time for volunteers to get trained. Another great thing for volunteers to do in helping out the news department was volunteers who had gotten skills and gotten training to put them in the position of being the trainer. And so once a volunteer gets really efficient on a portable recorder, then they can offer trainings on portable recording. Same thing for headlines writing. And once a volunteer gets really efficient in researching and writing headlines, then they can start doing trainings on that, kind of reinforcing this very participatory environment, even when it comes to training. So those are a couple things I wanted to mention about training. Are there any more questions about training or other things that people want to talk about in like the last 4 or 5 minutes that we have that we've missed? I know we didn't talk about the examples section of the outline for today's webinar, but those are things you can also check out on your own. There's some sources there where you can go and listen to specific episodes of Groundwire, or you can check out the Homelessness Marathon. There's a short video online. You can watch a few minutes of that just to see that example of a community news broadcasting event. I pause for questions if people have any questions or comments.
Yeah, and I just wanted to let folks know that we will be posting the outline on all of these resources with the archived webinar, so no need to worry about that if you didn't get a chance to take in all of the different things we were showing here. We're planning to, like I said, just have that posted so you'll be able to take a look at those things. So please feel free to ask any questions you have about any of the topics that our presenters were talking about today.
You can also type your question if you're shy. Anabel, do you have any?
Sorry, I was just going to say the same thing. Feel free if either of you have kind of closing statements or other resources that you can think of, or any. We have one question here about recruitment, I guess, which you did cover in the outreach, but maybe if there's other ideas about how you folks get people to join up for your volunteer news departments.
I mean, I think one thing that our news program does is at the end of every show, we invite people to come and get involved in the station. We give the phone number and contact information. We regularly promote our station tours on our website and on our airwaves. So our station every third Thursday does tours at noon, 3, and 6 p.m. So volunteers, potential volunteers, come in, check out the station, go to each of the departments, get a little 5-minute overview of what's happening in those departments, get an overview of CKUT's history, structure. It's about a 30 to 45-minute tour, depending on how many people show up and how many questions there are. And I think that's a really great way to do recruitment for people who are able to come here. In terms of recruiting people who are not necessarily coming to the station, right, because that tour involves people having to book time and come out for that tour, is the community event broadcasting. So the bigger presence we can have in the community doing live broadcasting, the presence we can have going out to events and recording, making sure our mic is present and it says CKUT so that people know we're there, talking with people while we're there, inviting them to come out to the station for the tours. Having that presence, I think, is really important. And if you have a community that you want to target, somebody typed teenagers here, then go to the high schools, find friendly teachers. CKUT's done numerous presentations in secondary and primary schools talking about community radio, just as a way to inform people that CKUT exists so that they can come in and check it out. I think those are some really great examples for doing outreach in the community.
Yeah, we do the sort of thing. We'll go to community centers or events, like any kind of public events. Like you said, you can go and record them for the radio station, but also make sure that, you know, your volunteers or yourself, you have some outreach materials. So we have flyers for the station in general, but also for each department. So you can make one just about the volunteer news department if you're interested. And in it, we have, of course, all the contact information, as well as things that people can get out of it. So we get a lot of questions from folks in terms of what kind of skills can they learn, what kind of things can they talk about. So for youth, sometimes people are like, I don't know if I can actually talk about those things on the radio, these things that actually matter to me. So it might just be a matter of listing them out as options, because sometimes when people think radio, it can be a little bit intimidating, but the idea of community radio is that we want folks to be able to talk about things that matter to them, even though they might be controversial or they might be you know, leaning towards a social justice perspective. That's the kind of stories that we're looking for. And there's also some examples of, I'm just trying to think, I know there's youth radio projects happening in the States. The one that I'm thinking of is slipping my mind right now, but you can you can have links for folks to look up online so that they can actually listen to other youth who've done community radio stories, just to get inspired and get ideas about that. We do a lot of campus outreach, but we're trying to do other stuff too.
I just included a link to the internships at CKUT. I think internships are a great way to get different volunteers seriously involved, because usually with an internship there's a set job or task description and usually a time commitment involved. It's kind of like a super volunteer position. So a volunteer might commit to coming into the program, you know, to the weekly news meeting, but an intern would probably commit to coming into the station 5 to 10 hours a week. So that's a really great thing to also offer youth who might be looking for experience within workplaces.
Yeah. HRY has we get high school co-ops, so kids in high school in Ontario have to do work placements. So we're on a list where youth can come in and they can do their work experience placement at the radio station. And then once they're there, it's really important for us we've made it a point to have specific roles for them to take on, so it makes them feel more invested in the space. So instead of having them, I guess, like put together papers in an office, we really give them a role. Like we've had things that folks are interested in doing, for example, social media outreach rep for CHRY, or being a producer as part of the news team, things like that. So I forgot to mention earlier that also our news collective is an internship-based thing. So folks there's like a general application process where there's a form that people fill out to express the things that they're looking for in their experience at the community radio station. So if there's goals, if there's interests they've always wanted to pursue, we want to try to meet those needs as well as gauge how much people can commit in terms of time and interest.
There's also, if your community has universities, because both CKUT and CHRY are based at universities that have journalism schools, some of those schools might be looking for places for their students getting practice. The same thing for other independent media in your community. If there's a magazine around community issues, for example, the elderly, certain workers in the community, you could reach out to that independent media source, that magazine, and see if anybody from their staff or from their magazine would like to come and do a segment on your station. So it's important for community radio not to work in isolation of all the independent media that's out there potentially in your area. So for example, here at CKUT, we have our campus media, so that includes newspapers and the campus newspaper actually produces a podcast that they link on their website, but then it airs every Tuesday on CKUT for about 15 minutes. So those are some examples of like collaborative recruitment that you might find easy as well. Any other questions?
Great. It doesn't seem like we have any other questions, but a lot of thank yous, and I would agree as well. Anabel and Gretchen, that was so excellent, such a great overview of the work that you folks have done, of how to build a volunteer news department, of ways to train people, of different models, of focusing on the necessity of community media, looking at alternative broadcasting and what both stations consider providing an alternative voice. And I'm just really glad that we had the chance to speak with both of you and for you both to present. It's making me so excited and remembering very fondly days of your working at a community station as well, and how important it is, and how many different kinds of people come through the door and are looking for a way to to have an expression and to have an outlet rather for expression, and to have a chance to tell the stories of their communities and their lives, and that's incredibly important. And that is what we're hoping all of you folks starting new stations out there are also going to be providing for your communities, for yourselves, and for the people in your area. So thank you to everyone. Thank you so much again to the presenters. Thank you for everyone for joining us. Again, keep an eye on our website for more upcoming webinars, and on the archives on our site, so that if you missed anything in this presentation, you can take a look at that. And then with the archives, I'll also have all of the resource documents for you to take a look at as well. So if there's no further comments, just again, thanks again to our presenters, and we'll close it here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you guys very much. Good luck with everything too.
Great. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks.